What if the secret to true freedom was already written down 2,000 years ago by a man who owned multiple villas, ran the finances of an empire, and then had the nerve to write letters telling everyone else to stop caring so much about money? Welcome to the history of the mind. I'm your host, and today we are diving into one of history's most gloriously contradictory figures. A man who preached detachment from wealth while sitting on one of the largest fortunes in the ancient world. A Stoic philosopher who advised the most powerful man alive and somehow thought that was going to go well. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up because we are talking about Seneca the Younger, the original philosopher who could not quite decide if he was Marcus Aurelius or a Roman Jeff Bezos. Before we get into the beautiful chaos that was Seneca's life, let me tell you why this matters to you right now, today, in the 21st century. We are living in an era of productivity gurus, minimalist influencers, and self-help bestsellers written by people who charge $5,000 for a weekend retreat about not being attached to things. Sound familiar? Seneca was doing this 2 millennia before it became a personal branding strategy. So either the philosophy is timeless, or human beings never actually learn anything. We will let you decide by the end of this video. Here is the setup. We are in Season 1 of the History of the Mind, which we are calling Architects of Reality. This whole series is built on a brilliant framework. We take the greatest thinkers who ever walked this earth, we line them up chronologically, and then we audit them through the lens of Mortimer J. Adler's great ideas. Adler spent a lifetime arguing that the entire conversation of human civilization revolves around about 102 fundamental concepts, things like justice, virtue, logic, the state, and today's star of the show, wealth. Every great thinker builds a mental blueprint, and we are here to examine Seneca's blueprint, admire the architecture, notice where the roof is leaking, and figure out what we can actually steal from it for our own lives. So who was Seneca the Younger? Born somewhere around 4 BC in what is now Spain, Lucius Annaeus, Seneca came from a wealthy family, moved to Rome, and proceeded to have one of the most dramatic careers in the history of dramatic careers. He became a lawyer, a writer, a Stoic philosopher, and eventually the chief advisor and tutor to Emperor Nero. Yes, that Nero. The one history remembers as the man who may have fiddled while Rome burned, although historians argue about that one endlessly. Seneca taught Nero everything, or at least tried to, which is either the greatest testament to the limits of philosophy or proof that some students are simply unteachable. Now here is where the satire practically writes itself. Seneca was not just a little bit wealthy. He was obscenely, cartoonishly, magnificently wealthy. We are talking about a man who allegedly owned multiple country villas, had enormous land holdings across the empire, and accumulated a fortune estimated by some ancient sources at around 300 million sesterces. In modern terms, that is the kind of money where you stop counting and just start calling it generational. And the same man, this very same Lucius Annaeus Seneca, sat down and wrote some of the most beautiful, profound, and deeply earnest letters about how we should all stop being so attached to material possessions. He wrote entire essays about the simple life, about how the wise person needs nothing external to be happy, about how fortune is a fickle mistress, and we should practice imagining losing everything so that we are not devastated when it happens. This is not hypocrisy in the boring, obvious sense. This is performance art. This is a man who understood something genuinely sophisticated about the philosophy he was practicing, and the sophistication is what we need to unpack, because Seneca actually had a defense for all of this, and it is surprisingly coherent. Enter the concept of premeditatio malorum, which translates roughly as the premeditation of evils, and which is one of the most powerful psychological tools the Stoics ever developed. The practice is simple in concept, and genuinely difficult in execution. You deliberately imagine in vivid detail everything going wrong. You picture losing your wealth. You imagine your home destroyed, your health failing, your reputation in ruins, your closest relationships gone. You sit with that imagined loss until it no longer terrifies you. And then, crucially, you return to your actual life with fresh eyes and genuine gratitude for what you have, because you have just proven to yourself that you could survive without it. Seneca's argument was not that you should be poor. His argument was that you should practice being unafraid of poverty. There is a staggering difference between those two positions, and this is where Adler's great idea of wealth becomes the perfect lens to examine what Seneca was actually saying. Adler, in his Syntopicon and throughout the great book's framework, traces how Western civilization has wrestled with a single question across centuries. Is wealth inherently good, inherently corrupting, or morally neutral? Aristotle said wealth was a necessary condition for the good life, but not sufficient on its own. The Sermon on the Mount suggested the camel and the needle situation, which was not encouraging for the rich. And Seneca planted himself somewhere genuinely interesting in that conversation. Wealth is fine, Seneca argued, as long as you own it and it does not own you. The moment you cannot imagine existing without your possessions, the moment your identity collapses without your status and your villas and your financial security, that is when you have become a slave to the very things that were supposed to serve you. Now let us be honest. And this is where the satire really flourishes. Seneca's critics in his own lifetime were absolutely brutal about this. The philosopher Publius Suilius Rufus reportedly attacked Seneca publicly, asking by what philosophy, by what teachers, had Seneca acquired such enormous wealth in just a few years of imperial friendship. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of leaving a comment under a minimalism influencer's Instagram post pointing out their sponsored content from luxury brands. Seneca's answer, to his credit, was not to pretend the contradiction did not exist. He acknowledged it. He wrote about it. He essentially said, "Look, I am a work in progress. I am fighting the same battles everyone is fighting, and the philosophy is the practice, not the destination." This is actually the most modern thing about Seneca. Contemporary self-help culture has a habit of presenting its practitioners as people who have arrived. They have achieved the thing. They are living the life. Seneca was refreshingly, sometimes painfully honest that he had not arrived anywhere. He was a man in process, wrestling with his own inconsistencies, trying to close the gap between what he knew to be true and how he actually lived. That gap between knowing and being is not a flaw in his philosophy. It is the whole point of the philosophy. The tragedy, and Stoicism was always aware that tragedy was waiting in the wings, is how Seneca's life ended. Nero, the student he had spent years tutoring and advising and apparently failing to fully civilize, eventually accused Seneca of involvement in an assassination conspiracy. Whether this was true, fabricated, or simply the excuse Nero needed to eliminate someone who had become inconvenient, we do not know for certain. What we do know is that Seneca was ordered to take his own life in 65 AD. And according to the accounts we have, he did so with the kind of calm, deliberate dignity that his entire philosophical career had been building toward. He had practiced this. He had premeditated this particular evil over and over in his writing and in his imagination. When the moment came, the man who had spent decades preparing to lose everything finally lost everything, and by all accounts, he met it without breaking. So, what do we take from Seneca's blueprint? Here is the architectural principle that Adler's framework helps us see clearly. Wealth, in Seneca's design, is load-bearing only when it has to be. You build your psychological structure so that wealth is comfortable furniture inside a sturdy room, not the walls themselves. The room stands without the furniture. You enjoy the furniture. You are simply not destroyed when it burns. That is the blueprint. Uncomfortable, satirically rich with irony, and somehow still completely applicable to every person watching this video who has ever felt anxious about money, success, status, or the terrifying possibility of losing what they have worked to build. The history of the mind continues, and the architects are just getting started. If you found value in this episode, Drop a comment below telling me whether you think Seneca was a genius, a hypocrite, or both, because both is genuinely on the table. Hit like if you want the algorithm to know you have excellent taste in ancient Roman philosophy. Subscribe so you do not miss the next blueprint. And share this with someone who needs permission to be wealthy and unbothered at the same time. Seneca would have wanted that, probably from his villa.